A startup idea isn't worth anything. It's the execution that matters. But sometimes the execution isn't worth anything either, and that needs to be fixed before it kills a potentially great startup idea. Look, this isn't clickbait or tough love. I don't assume that you're an idiot walking around thinking your startup idea is brilliant when it's really terrible. I mean, we all do that, right? But most of us eventually figure it out. So let's go ahead and push through the fact that most startup ideas are indeed terrible. Seriously, give me like 30 seconds on this. It sets the groundwork for the rest of the post. Think of the measurement of the potential success of a startup idea as a funnel. At the top of the funnel, I have to ask myself the question, is my startup idea terrible? If I can answer that question in the negative, I get to move my idea down the funnel. That said, the vast majority of startup ideas are terrible and dead and floating at the top of the funnel. Okay, so now we're past the first cut. One more big cut to go before we get to the real issue. Now, even if my startup idea isn't terrible, I don't get to push it very far down the funnel because the next question eliminates a lot of potentially successful startup ideas. Am I going to act on my startup idea in any meaningful way? You see where I'm going? Now we've got a bunch of never started startup ideas floating dormant in the funnel just below the terrible startup ideas. Some of these ideas might be game changers and world changers, but we'll never know because the idea never got past the someday I'm going to read a really inspirational article about startups and make a serious run at this idea stage. Hey, maybe this is that article. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you've already stopped reading. For the rest of you, here's the kicker. Yeah, it's a story I see repeated a lot with startups. They spend a ton of time building beautiful business models with pristine and thorough plans for all possible outcomes. Then, when those plans meet their first punch in the mouth from the real world, the plans are abandoned immediately, and soon after, the idea is abandoned as well. And then, here's an execution story I see repeated all the time too. Founders and product leaders develop immaculate, verbose, and gorgeous roadmaps that detail down to the day all the execution. They map out what the company will be building, marketing, and selling. Then that roadmap goes into a folder somewhere and doesn't get looked at again until the end of the year, and then they realize they did about 30% of what they said they were going to do. Now, combine those two issues, and that's exactly where most non-terrible, non-dormant startup ideas go to die. There comes a point in every entrepreneurial journey when the founder realizes that the complexity of running their business is greater than their capacity to run it successfully. Maybe this moment has happened for you already, maybe it hasn't. I'm a startup vet. I like when this panic moment happens to me within a week or so of starting to execute. And if it doesn't, it makes me seriously reconsider the viability of that idea as a business. If I can see an easy path in front of me, then hell, so can everyone else with a couple bucks and a dream. The thing is, most viable startup ideas don't die because the founders got in over their head. Some of them do, sure, and the resulting post-mortem stories when they come out read like watching trains collide. Startup raises $100 million at a $10 billion valuation and shuts down the next week due to lack of runway. We tend to remember those. But even if you think that kind of overreach and underperform implosion happens a lot, and I believe that too, experience tells me that an exponentially larger number of startups flame out because the founders made their milestones too small, too simple, so they could track their execution more easily. This happens for a lot of reasons, and panic is one of them, but it's definitely not the most frequent reason or the sneakiest. Everyone wants founders to show their progress, and not just a little progress, but huge leaps of progress. So what happens is founders make these plans and roadmaps and charts and graphs that have nothing to do with the actual progress of executing on the idea, but it looks like progress. It looks exactly how a big, mature corporate company would run with their brilliant idea, with all the bloat included. They create theoretical checklists for the sole purpose of checking items off that checklist. And when they don't know what items to put on that checklist, they look to a methodology that tells them to put a checkbox in there for something like find product market fit. And then they come to me asking how to find product market fit. What? I don't know that. Well, I mean, I do, but not for you. It's your product and your target market. You put the product in the market and see if it fits. And when it doesn't, you find out why. And you take a hammer to the product peg and pound it through the market hole. That kind of progress is difficult to track in a Gantt chart. So that kind of advice doesn't sell a lot of books or speaking engagements. But I have to tell you, these days, especially with profitability as the new mantra, I rarely read anything about idea execution that isn't a version of stay in the shallow end and splash around for a while. Well, unless it's the polar opposite, which always translates to go big or go home. Now, I'm a believer in that, but I can't tell you what the heck big is or where the hell home is. I think big might be an IPO and home might be your parents' house, but I'm guessing. Idea viability is a moving target. It's not binary, and its milestones are unique to each startup idea. Furthermore, progress towards those milestones can only be measured when rooted in the makeup and the working style of the team executing on it. In fact, there are so many variables involved in keeping the execution of an idea on the path to viability, or product market fit to use the proper term, that trying to follow a vanilla, templated, paint by numbers methodology usually guarantees that the execution will remain uncomplicated, but ultimately fruitless. When this happens, the startup team does a lot of work. But that work almost always results in a product or service that looks exactly like what a big, bloated corporate company would have created based on that brilliant startup idea. And that's when that brilliant startup idea dies. So why did I write this? Look, I used to have a bunch of little tricks that I could use to give myself a head start as an entrepreneur. I'm a coder, I can code, I know how the internet and how mobile works. I've got a little cash that I can throw at businesses when I find some kind of idea I want to try. I mean, the kids don't need to go to college, right? And I've got content channels that I can use to content market through. But these days, everyone has access to these tools. There's no code, there's low code out there. You don't have to know the syntax to become a programmer. There's a ridiculously cheap infrastructure available to anyone that just requires a little bit of modest learning to be able to put up an application overnight, or even the infrastructure of a non-technical business. And there are creator channels and social networks that allow anyone to get started as long as they have something to say. So, and a lot of times, if you have a really good idea, it's never been easier to start a business, but you've got to get to market quickly. There's no excuse now for not being able to turn your idea into a minimum viable product and get it out the door. So I try to encourage at every point for people to do this. And if you need help, that allows me to segue into Teaching Startup. That is my project to make more and better entrepreneurs by offering all the benefits of having a startup advisor in your inbox and on demand at about 2% of the cost. You can go to teachingstartup.com and become a member, and that's how you can support me by helping me help you. So go to teachingstartup.com. There's a free trial. Give it a try. Hopefully you will become a better entrepreneur, and you can help me help you.